edge of a forest in the eastern interior of Madagascar, just before dawn, in the late summer of 1961. Above the bed, a mosquito net moves a little in the warm air. The room is whitewashed, with a small wooden cross on one wall, a wardrobe with one door slightly open, and a tin jug of water on a low table beside a folded enamel basin. The shutters are open. Outside, the sky over the forest is a pale, even grey, the colour of unbleached paper. The air smells faintly of damp wood and wood smoke from a kitchen fire someone has started downstairs in the back of the house. On the floor, a small German-engineered tape recorder, the colour of a paperback book, a Nagra, is open with its reels turning at 15 inches per second. A man in his middle 30s sits on the edge of the bed in his socks. A microphone hangs from one hand on a long lead. A notebook rests open in the other. He listens. He has been awake since 4. He has slept badly, the same as the night before, and the night before that. The microphone in his hand is heavier than it should be, and the lead trails across the floorboards to the recorder at his feet. The notebook is open at a page that says, in pencil, 3 lines crossed out, and a 4th one not yet crossed out. The entries for the 3 previous mornings he has tried and failed to record what he came here to record. Outside, the forest at Périnet makes its first sounds. Small bird, small frog, a tree creak, and somewhere up the slope, behind a wall of green, a family of lemurs is also waking up. He's here for one particular call he has been told 100 times he will probably not catch. His name is David Attenborough. He's 35 years old. He's here to make a wildlife program called Zoo Quest for the BBC. We're going to spend a little over an hour with him. Settle in. To understand what Attenborough is doing in that forest at dawn, and why nobody had ever done it before, we have to go back another 35 years to a small house on the edge of a college lawn in Leicestershire. It's the 8th of May, 1926. He is born in Isleworth, West London, the second of 3 brothers. Richard the eldest, John the youngest. Sons of Frederick, a schoolmaster, and Mary, who reads in the evenings. When David is 6, the family moves north. Frederick has been made the principal of what is now the University of Leicester, and the family settles into the college hall on the campus grounds, with woods and fields behind the house and Leicestershire lanes beyond. And here, almost immediately, the boy begins collecting things. The collecting starts in the spring of 1933, when he's 7. His older brother Richard has been sent away to boarding school. The boy and his younger brother John are at home in the college hall, where the long lawn ends at a low wall, and beyond the wall, a stand of mixed woodland. He is given, for his 7th birthday, a small wooden cabinet with 8 shallow drawers, designed for an entomologist's pinned beetles. He doesn't yet have any beetles. He uses the drawers for the stones. Each drawer is labelled in his own pencil on a small white card. Igneous, sedimentary, metamorphic, local, distant, fossiliferous. The 8th drawer, for a long time, is labelled unknown. Frederick, the father, isn't a naturalist. He's a classicist, a Greek scholar, a man who reads to the boys after supper from translations of Homer. Mary, the mother, reads novels in the evenings, slowly with a finger under each line. Fossils first, ammonites and belemnites, and the broken fragments of fossilized sea lilies he chips out of the limestone in a quarry near his school. Then birds' eggs, then a snake skin he keeps in a shoebox under his bed. The quarry is at Markfield, about 8 miles west of the college hall. He cycles there on Saturdays with a small geologist's hammer and a leather satchel his mother has lined with newspaper. The fossils are carboniferous, 300 million years old, give or take. The boy is, at this point, 9. He has read enough to know that the difference between his own age and the age of the snail in his shoebox is roughly the difference between an hour and the entire history of the world. And he draws them. He draws everything. Every fossil. Every feather. He has a small desk under a window in his bedroom that looks out over the college hall lawn. He goes to Wiggerstone Grammar School in Leicester, a long, plain-fronted building near the city centre, and from there, in 1945, he wins a scholarship to Clare College, Cambridge, to read geology and zoology. After Cambridge, briefly, the Royal Navy, National Service, 2 years on a small ship in the Atlantic. Then a few months at a small academic publisher in London, editing children's textbooks about science. The publisher is in a basement off Tottenham Court Road. The light is bad. The textbooks are heavy. He's 24, and he can see, with absolute clarity, that he's on the wrong floor of the wrong building for the next 40 years. He hates the publishing job. He starts looking for something else. He writes letters. He applies for posts at museums, at universities, at a small zoo near Manchester that needs a curator of reptiles. He gets, by his own later account, a small stack of polite refusals which he keeps for many years in the bottom drawer of his desk. In 1952, the BBC opens applications for trainee producers in its talks department. He applies. He is interviewed by a woman called Mary Adams, the BBC's first female television producer, an authoritative, slightly impatient woman who runs the talks department like a small army. She gives him the job. She also tells him in writing that he should never appear on camera because his teeth are too big. The interview, by Attenborough's later account, takes 35 minutes, of which roughly 7 are taken up by Mary Adams, asking about his time on the small naval ship in the Atlantic, what kind of ship, how big the crew, what he read in the evenings. He says, mostly Conrad. She nods. She writes one word in the margin of her notes, which he doesn't show him, and which years later he will see in the file, promising. The Teeth memo is dated the 14th of October, 1952. It is, in full, 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph welcomes him formally to the talks department and confirms the starting salary. The second paragraph reads, he won't be required, at any point in his training, to appear on camera. The producer's role at the BBC being a deliberately invisible one, we may add that, in any case, his teeth are too big. The talks department in 1952 is in a converted warehouse in Lime Grove, in Shepherd's Bush, West London. Its furniture is mostly second-hand. Its corridors smell faintly of cigarette smoke and Dettol. Most of its producers are women. Most of its on-air talent is men. Attenborough, in his first month, makes programs about ballet, about archaeology, about a man who collects exotic moths in Surrey. He's 26. He's paid £8 and 10 shillings a week. The moth collector lives in a tile-hung cottage at the edge of a small wood near Guildford. His garden is mostly long grass. He runs a mercury vapour lamp from a length of cable he has laid himself from the kitchen window. Attenborough goes down on the train from Waterloo with a sound engineer and a Bolex camera in a leather case. They film on a single warm evening in August, the lamp drawing in hawk moths the size of a man's thumb. The moth collector identifies each one as it lands, holding it gently in a small specimen jar to show its underwings. The whole program, in the end, runs 12 minutes. Attenborough will remember this evening, years later, as the first time he understood what the camera could do that the lecture hall could not. The camera could put the listener in the room with the moth. In 1952, the talks department covers almost everything the BBC broadcasts that isn't sport or music. Politics, science, history, the arts, nature. There are only about 400,000 television sets in the country. 2 years in 1954, the BBC commissions a new programme that will follow the London Zoo's animal collecting expeditions in real time. They call it Zoo Quest. The presenter is to be Jack Lester, the head of the London Zoo's reptile house, a tall, soft-voiced man with an ulcer and a slight stammer. The day before the first transmission, Jack Lester collapses with his ulcer and is taken to hospital. The studio gallery looks at one another. The producer asks David, who has been the off-air director, whether he can present it himself. He has to make a decision before the transmission. He says yes. He walks down to the studio floor. He stands in front of a camera for the first time in his life. He talks for 50 minutes about the animals. Mary Adams never refers to the teeth memo again. Zoo Quest runs for the next 10 years. Over those 10 years, he and his small crew, usually 3 people, a camera, a sound recordist, and him, go to British Guiana, to Sierra Leone, to Indonesia, to Paraguay, to New Guinea, to Borneo, to Komodo for the dragons. They bring back between them a small ark's worth of animals for the zoo and a slow accumulation of footage that, by 1961, has made Attenborough the BBC's quiet specialist on places no British camera has been before. Which brings us back, in the spring of 1961, to the bedroom in Madagascar. By the spring of 1961, Zoo Quest has run for 7 years and shot in 7 countries. He has filmed every animal the BBC has asked him to film. And on this trip, Attenborough has done something nobody had done before on a wildlife shoot. He has brought a portable tape recorder. Before 1961, wildlife sound was recorded in a studio after the fact. Bird calls dubbed in by a Foley artist. Ambient forest layered from a stock library. The image on the screen had no actual sound attached to it. There were people whose entire job at the BBC was to make a coconut shell sound like a horse and a wooden box sound like a bird's wing. They worked in a basement in Shepherd's Bush. The wildlife footage came back from the trip. The wildlife sound was made up later. The Nagra changes that. It runs on batteries. It weighs 3 kilograms. It can be carried into a forest and pointed at a lemur. And the lemur he has come for is the indri. The indri is the largest lemur on Madagascar. Black and white, the size of a small child, with no proper tail and a face like a startled toddler. It is also, by all accounts, the loudest land animal in Madagascar. Its dawn call carries through 3 kilometers of rainforest. A family of indri at full chorus sounds like a brass section played underwater. And nobody, before that morning in 1961, had ever recorded one. Attenborough sits on the bed in his socks and waits. Just after 5:30, somewhere up the slope behind the house, the first call begins. He moves out onto the small veranda and lifts the microphone. He doesn't trust the wind. The reels turn. He records on the first take 11 minutes of the indri family calling, and then he does something that's never been done either. He rewinds the tape and plays it back at full volume into the same forest. The lemurs go quiet, then they answer. He records that too. He sits for some time after, with the microphone in his lap, listening to the forest go ordinary again. A jacana calls. A small wind moves the leaves. The cook downstairs starts grinding coffee with a hand mill. He'll say, in a memoir written half a century later, that this was the morning he understood the recorder was as important as the camera. The animal makes the sound. The sound is the animal answering itself. Without it, the picture was only ever half the story. Back in London, 6 weeks later, an audio engineer named Christopher Parsons cuts the two recordings together in the basement of Lime Grove Studios in Shepherd's Bush. Zoo Quest to Madagascar airs in October 1961. 3.5 million people watch the lemurs answering back. It is, by quite a long way, the most listened to wildlife sequence in British television to date. Years later, when the BBC Sound Archive is being catalogued in detail, the 11 minutes of indri call from that morning will be given the reference number 29004. It is, by any sensible measure, the founding document of British wildlife broadcasting. It is also, at the time of cataloguing, the third most requested tape in the archive, after the coronation and the first moon landing. 4 years later, in 1965, the BBC creates a second television channel, BBC Two, and asks Attenborough, then 38, to run it. He says yes again. For 7 years, he's controller of BBC Two. He commissions Civilization, Kenneth Clark walking through Europe explaining painting. He commissions The Ascent of Man, Jacob Bronowski, walking through history, explaining science. He commissions Match of the Day, Snooker in Colour, the first run of the Wombles. His office is on the 8th floor of Television Centre, the new circular building at Wood Lane in Shepherd's Bush that opened in 1960. The building is donut-shaped, with a fountain at the centre and a corridor that runs around the inside of the ring on every floor. He shares the floor with the controllers of Radio 3 and the light programme. The light programme controller smokes a pipe at his desk. The Radio 3 controller listens to a concert from his open door at 4 in the afternoon. The corridor smells of pipe smoke and Earl Grey tea and, late on Friday evenings, of whiskey from somebody's drinks cupboard. Most of the commissioning happens at lunch. The BBC has a canteen on the 3rd floor, where producers eat steak and kidney pudding off white china at 11:30, and a small dining room on the 6th floor, where controllers eat lamb chops at 1 with a glass of claret if they're feeling expensive. Attenborough takes Kenneth Clark to lunch in 1966 and orders him a glass of claret and asks him whether he might like to walk, in front of a camera, through the cathedrals of Europe explaining what beauty is for. Kenneth Clark, by all accounts, says, "Yes, on one condition. I won't, under any circumstances, work with John Berger." Attenborough agrees. The commission goes through that afternoon. Civilization runs for 13 weeks in 1969. 5 million people, in this country alone, watch the series end to end. It is the largest non-fiction audience for a single television series to that point. The Ascent of Man airs in 1973, just after he resigns. The commission was his. Jacob Bronowski, a Polish-Jewish mathematician who has spent the war working on radar, walks through the history of human thought from a Stone Age handprint to the gates of Auschwitz. Both series are slow, Both expect the viewer to sit through whole minutes of a single talking figure in a single landscape. Both still air 50 years later in television courses. They are part of what David is leaving behind when he hands back the keys to the office in late 72. In November 1972, his name starts being floated as the next Director General, the most senior job at the BBC. He phones his older brother, Richard, the actor, late one evening from his office. He says, "I don't think I want to do it. I think I want to go back to making programs." Programs are not safer than the Director General job. They are smaller, more anxious, and more interesting. He's 46. He's been an administrator for 7 years. He has, by his own account, not been in a forest with a camera since 1965. Richard, by all accounts, tells him, "Go." It is, by Attenborough's own dating, about 20 past 11 on a Tuesday night in mid-November. The office is on the 8th floor. The corridor outside is empty. The desk lamp is on. A sandwich, half eaten, is on the blotter. Egg and cress from the 4th floor canteen, which closed 3 hours ago. He puts the receiver down. He sits in the office for another 20 minutes. He looks out at the lights of Shepherd's Bush, the wet pavement, the late buses, the curtained windows of the small terrace houses across the road from the BBC. He thinks, by his own later account, about the morning at Périnet, 12 years before. He walks home, that night, to the house in Richmond he and Jane have lived in since the children were small. He doesn't tell her until breakfast. She listens, by all accounts, and then says, "Well, you'll be away more again, won't you?" And then she puts another piece of toast in the rack. He resigns the next week. He's 46 years old. He spends the first week after the resignation reacquainting himself with the cutting rooms. He walks into the Natural History Unit office in Bristol, where most of the BBC's wildlife people had quietly moved while he was running London, and asks the senior producer there, a man called Christopher Parsons, who'll remember him from the Madagascar tapes, what he can usefully do. Parsons, by all accounts, thinks for a moment and then says, "How would you feel about presenting the whole history of life?" Most lives don't have a second act after that. Most lives spend the second act becoming smaller. Fewer offices, fewer cars, less weight. Attenborough spends his second act getting larger. In 1979, on BBC Two, Life on Earth airs. 13 episodes, 3 years in production, filmed in 39 countries, a budget that horrified the accountants. The crew is small, usually 4 people and Attenborough, a cameraman, an assistant who carries the tripod, a sound recordist, a fixer with the local language, and David, who writes the script in his hotel room each night in a small pucker pad with a fountain pen. The schedule for 3 years runs roughly like this: 9 months a year away from home, 6 weeks at a time in one location, then home for a week, then another 6 weeks somewhere else. 8 to 12 countries in any given calendar year. Hotels mostly. A few rented bungalows. One houseboat on the Sepik River in Papua New Guinea that takes on water in the night. There is a morning on the Galapagos when he stands on a black volcanic shore at 5 in the morning in a wet anorak, holding a microphone over a colony of nesting marine iguanas. And the assistant cameraman whispers, "David, the sun is up." And David, without turning round, says, "Yes, I know." Another morning, in Borneo, an orangutan walks slowly out of the canopy at chest height along a horizontal branch and stops 3 feet from the camera and stares directly at him. The cameraman, by all accounts, holds his breath for a count of 10 and gets the shot. Episode 3, Life on Earth, 8 minutes in. You can still watch it. One evening, in Papua New Guinea, a male vogelkop bowerbird arranges, in front of the camera, a small pile of blue plastic bottle tops he has scavenged from the missionaries' rubbish heap, alongside a careful arrangement of yellow leaves and one red rhododendron flower. The bird steps back. He looks at his work. He moves one of the bottle tops half an inch to the left. And in episode 12, in a forest in Rwanda, Attenborough sits down next to a family of mountain gorillas. The matriarch's name is Poppy. She is 12 years old. Her infant son is on her chest. The crew has been with the family for 3 weeks. The gorillas have stopped paying attention to them. As Attenborough whispers his piece to camera, Poppy leans over and starts picking through his hair. He stops whispering. He doesn't move. The infant climbs from its mother onto his lap, looks up, decides he's uninteresting, and goes back to its mother. He keeps the camera rolling. The scene runs for 4 minutes on broadcast. The original take, in the rushes, runs 19. The cameraman, a man called Martin Saunders, will say years later that the hardest thing was framing. He had to keep the gorillas' faces in focus while not moving his eye away from the viewfinder, because moving the eye meant moving the camera, and moving the camera meant ending whatever this was. The location is Karisoke, the research station Dian Fossey has run, alone for the most part, since 1967. Karisoke sits at 10,000 feet, in a permanent low cloud, in a stand of Hagenia trees on the side of Mount Visoke in northern Rwanda. Dian Fossey, in 1978, is 45 years old, lean, sleepless, and part way through a doctorate. She has, by this point, identified and named over 50 individual gorillas in the Visoke population. She will, 6 years from this morning, be murdered in her cabin by an unknown assailant. On the day Attenborough films, she watches the take from a low rock 20 feet away, not moving. She doesn't speak for the 4 minutes. Afterwards, by all accounts, she says one word, "Good," and walks back up the slope to her cabin to write her field notes. 22 years later, on Blue Planet 2, a different crew films a long-finned pilot whale carrying her dead calf for 17 days through the waters off Norway. The infant has died, probably, from plastic toxins in her milk. Attenborough narrates that sequence too. The voice doesn't lift. He just says what happened. 500 million people watched Life on Earth around the world in 1979 and the early 80s. It is the largest audience for a single documentary series to that point in history. The series becomes a strand. The Living Planet, 1984. Trials of Life, 1990. Life in the Freezer, 1993. The Private Life of Plants, 1995. The Life of Birds, 1998. The Life of Mammals, 2002. Each one takes 3 years in production, runs in 30 or 40 countries, and is narrated by the same calm British voice. 1984 brings The Living Planet and a long, high-altitude sequence in the Ethiopian highlands. A troop of gelada baboons browsing the short grass at 12,000 feet on the Simeon Escarpment at sunrise. The baboons are the only primates in the world that live off grass. They sleep on the cliff face, in a single line, with their backs to a 1,000-foot drop. Attenborough walks slowly along the line, in the half-dark, narrating directly to the camera. The microphone picks up his breath, the wind, and the faint grumble of 200 gelders eating grass in unison. The sequence runs 4.5 minutes and contains, by Attenborough's own later account, the longest direct-to-camera piece he had ever attempted to that point. Trials of Life follows in 1990. Off Punta Norte, in Patagonia, orca whales hunt sea lions in the surf. The orcas have learned to deliberately beach themselves on the gravel to catch the pups, then to roll back into the water with the prey. No camera had filmed this before. The Argentine biologists who knew about it had been watching from the cliff with binoculars for 15 years. The Private Life of Plants, 1995. One sequence is a strangler fig in Costa Rica engulfing its host tree. Time-lapsed across 18 months of locked-off camera, the fig is patient, the host has no idea. Then The Life of Birds, in 1998. In the eucalyptus forests of southern Australia, a male superb lyrebird has worked into his courtship song the sound of a chainsaw, the sound of a camera shutter, and the precise alarm call of a builder's reversing lorry. The lyrebird sings all three, in sequence, in a clearing at dawn, while Attenborough crouches behind a fallen log, and Sir David's voice in the narration says, "That's a chainsaw." Then, "That's a camera." Then, very quietly, That's a builder's reversing lorry. Life in the freezer, in 1993, takes him to Antarctica for the first time. He is 67. The crew arrives at the Halley Research Station in late October, the start of the southern summer, on a Royal Air Force Hercules that lands on a runway carved into the ice shelf. The opening sequence of Episode 1 is filmed on a stretch of pack ice off the Antarctic Peninsula, where roughly 200,000 chin-strap penguins are nesting. Attenborough sits on a small wooden crate in the middle of the colony in a red expedition jacket, and the penguins, after about half an hour, simply walk around him. One of them, by all accounts, briefly nibbles his bootlace. He says, on camera, in the finished take, that the cold is the first thing the listener at home can't fully grasp. Antarctica is colder than imagination. The wind this morning is a steady force 7 from the south, and the temperature, by the meteorologist's reading from the Halley hut, is -18 Celsius. The episode airs in Britain in November of that year, on a wet Sunday evening, and 11.5 million sit down to the penguins walking around the man on the crate. The Life of Mammals arrives in 2002. In the Thai forest in Côte d'Ivoire, a young chimpanzee uses a stone on top of a flat rock to crack open a hard nut he has carried home in his hand. He is being watched by his mother, who learned the same technique from her own mother. The technique is older than the country. And in 1997, while he's filming on the other side of the world, his wife, Jane Oriel, dies of a brain hemorrhage in a hospital in Bristol. They had been married 47 years. She had run the house, the school runs, the family life, while he was away 9 months of every year filming. He is filming when he gets the call. In New Zealand, the call comes from his daughter Susan in Bristol at about 6 o'clock in the morning local time. He flies home that afternoon via Singapore, via Heathrow, and the journey takes 31 hours, most of which he spends, by all accounts, awake in his seat, looking at the small grey square of cabin window beside him. The funeral is at the small parish church in Petersham, half a mile from the house in Richmond. Richard reads, John reads, Susan reads. David, by all accounts, doesn't. He sits in the front pew between his children and listens. After Jane, in his early 70s, he keeps working. He says later that the work is the only thing he knows how to do. He moves, after the funeral, into a single room at the back of the house, overlooking the garden. He keeps Jane's books in their old order on the shelves. He keeps her chair by the kitchen window. He works from a small desk that used to be in the spare bedroom, on which he keeps a single frame photograph. Jane and the children, on a beach in Cornwall, in 1956. Blue Planet, 2001. Planet Earth, 2006. Frozen Planet, 2011. Africa, 2013. Planet Earth 2, 2016. 600 million viewers. That blue whale is the first ever filmed properly, caught from a small inflatable boat off the coast of Sri Lanka. The whale is 100 feet long. The boat is 20. The cameraman, Doug Allen, keeps the shot for 45 seconds and then has to lie down on the deck because he's, very briefly, afraid. Planet Earth 2006 turns on a single 30-second sequence of a snow leopard hunting marker on a near vertical cliff in the Hindu Kush in northern Pakistan. The sequence is the result of 3 crews, in 3 winters, in 3 different valleys. The leopard appears, in finished broadcast, for 28 seconds. Nobody had filmed one hunting before. 5 years later, Frozen Planet opens with the polar bear sequence, a single mother bear emerging in early March from her den under a snowdrift on Svalbard, with 2 cubs, after 5 months underground. The cubs are the size of grapefruit. The mother is starving and has not eaten since November. She walks her cubs 3 miles that morning to the edge of the pack ice, where she leaves them on a low rock and walks out alone to find a seal. And then, in 2016, Planet Earth 2 carries the marine iguana hatchling sequence, a single newly hatched iguana the length of a man's finger, sprinting 50 yards across volcanic sand pursued, then surrounded, then very nearly caught by a moving net of racer snakes. The iguana escapes, barely, onto a rock at the edge of the shore. By 2020, the work has shifted. The series are now also about what is being lost. A Life on Our Planet, released in October that year, is half a memoir and half a warning. He addresses the United Nations Climate Summit in Glasgow in 2021 at the age of 95. The podium is taller than he is. The hall is the main plenary at the Scottish Event Campus, a low, metal-clad building on the banks of the Clyde. There are roughly 4,000 people in the room. Heads of state, journalists, civil servants, a few invited school children in the back row. The Queen, 95 herself, has sent a video message earlier in the week. Attenborough has prepared 7 minutes of remarks. He has practiced the delivery, by all accounts, in his study at Richmond, with his daughter Susan timing him on a stopwatch. He has marked the script in pencil for places to breathe. He opens with, "My lifetime is also an extraordinary period of change. I find it hard to imagine the world I was born into. In 1926, he stops on the recording for a small smile. Then he says, "We have come to the moment of decision." The address runs 6 minutes and 43 seconds. The room stands. He sits down beside Susan, takes a sip of water, and writes in his pocket notebook, "Kept under time." 3 years later, in 2024, he records the narration for Ocean, his most recent series. He is, by that point, 98. The recording sessions, by his own preference, take place at Pinewood Studios, not the BBC. Pinewood has a smaller booth with a single lamp and a producer he has worked with for 26 years. He records, on a good day, 11 minutes of finished narration. On a slower day, 3. He sits in a leather chair the producer has had brought in for him. He drinks tea between takes. He occasionally asks for a word to be reworded because the consonant has become hard to land. He's 8 years older than the United Nations itself. There is something quiet about that. A man older than the institution he is now politely telling to do better. And in 2025, last year, Ocean is released. He's 99 when he records the narration. Which brings us, 4 days ago, to a house in Richmond, a quiet residential road, a sash window onto a small garden, a study with books from the floor to the ceiling. It is the 8th of May, 2026. Sir David Attenborough turns 100 years old. He has lunch with his daughter Susan and his son Robert, both of them in their late 60s. He answers by hand several hundred birthday letters. The house is on a quiet road close to the river. 2 stories. A small front garden with a low brick wall. A porch. 3 steps up to the front door. He has lived here since 1954. The neighbours, by now, are mostly the children and grandchildren of the neighbours he had when he and Jane moved in. His study is at the back, overlooking the garden. There is a leather-topped desk under the window. There is a row of low bookshelves running along the wall on the right, filled with the field guides of 50 years. Peterson's Birds, the Reader's Digest Field Guide to the Wildflowers of Britain, his own annotated copy of Darwin's Voyage of the Beagle, 4 shelves of bound BBC scripts in red ring binders. On the wall behind the desk, there are 3 framed black and white photographs. Jane, in 1953, on a beach in Cornwall, holding Susan as a baby. The crew at Karisoke, in 1978, with Diane Fossey at the centre, and a single still from the rushes of Poppy the gorilla reaching out and beginning to pick through his hair. On the morning of the 8th of May, 2026, his post arrives in a single grey canvas sack carried up the path by a man from the Royal Mail. 472 letters, cards from schools, a drawing from a 6-year-old in Inverness of what she thinks an indri looks like, which is, by all accounts, not bad. He sits at the desk, drinks his second cup of tea, and starts answering the letters in the order they arrived. He writes in a small, slightly slanted hand, in blue fountain pen. He signs on the cards from schools. Full first name and surname. On the cards from old friends. Just the initials. 4 days late, then, the part where it all gets gathered up. More than 30 species are now named after him. There is a research vessel, the Royal Research Ship Sir David Attenborough, anchored off the British Antarctic Territory, taking water samples. There is a studio at the Natural History Museum in London with his name on it. There is an Attenborough Gallery at the Knepp Rewilding Estate in Sussex. There is a 100-year-old fossil tortoise named after him in the Galapagos. Surveys in this country put him, year after year, among the most trusted public figures in British life. And the voice, the slow, dry, low prosodic voice, has by now narrated, by one careful count, 8% of the entire species catalogue on Earth. And the long story comes back round. He is in Richmond. He writes letters by hand. He is, by every report from his daughter, fully himself. Which brings us, finally, back to a bicycle on a country lane east of Leicester in the early autumn of 1935. The boy is 9. The bicycle is a black Hercules with a small canvas bag on the handlebars. In the bag, wrapped in a torn page of the Leicester Mercury, there are 2 ammonites, the fragment of a fossilized sea lily and the curled grey shell of a small extinct snail he has not yet identified. He goes home to his desk under the window at the college hall to draw them. He doesn't know that he will, one morning, sit in a forest in Madagascar and hear a family of lemurs answer their own recorded call. Or that one autumn he will sit next to a gorilla and her infant in Rwanda and not move. Or that, 90 years from this afternoon, in a quiet house in Richmond, he will turn 100 and answer his post by hand. He pedals slowly along the lane. The light is going. The hedges smell of cut grass. He gets home before dark. This has been History to Sleep To. Subscribe for future episodes. They're dropping twice a week. Produced by Stupid Human Limited.